Hey everybody, so it's Andrea here and I'm going to show you how to make basil pesto. Now why basil pesto? Well, because it's the end of summer and we've got a bumper crop of basil, so that is the perfect recipe to use it up and make the most of it, but also because basil pesto as a love letter to red wine. And if you know me, you know I'm a master sommelier and I'm all about food and wine pairing, and I love to make it easy and delicious. So that's what we're gonna do here with this basil pesto. It's a super simple recipe, and what I love about it for the end of summer is it's no heat, no cooking skill, just a food processor or a blender and the perfect ingredients, and you will have a perfect basil pesto. Whether you've ever made it before or not, you can get started with this recipe and it's as easy as boiling water. All right, so let's do that. Let's get started. I'll talk more about the wine pairings in just a minute, and I've got a couple tweaks to the classic basil pesto recipe, so if you're an aficionado, listen up, because the reason that I make the tweaks, there's a good reason for it. It's to make the dish as wine friendly as possible. So the first thing is garlic. Now typically the classic recipe for one batch would be a couple of garlic cloves. I cut it down to just one because garlic can be a little acerbic, a little bit bitter. I don't want it to be too strong and overpower the wine. Second thing, cheese. And normally for a classic recipe, you would mince the garlic, which takes a little skill, so it's better to use the blender or the food processor because you don't have to do that. Or you would grate the cheese. And here you don't have to do that because pulsing it is gonna get that cheese in a perfect texture. Now, cheese with basil pesto is classically Parmigiano Reggiano. I change that, I tweak it. I use Spanish Manchego, which is a sheep's milk cheese. It's got a similar texture to Parmigiano Reggiano, but a lot less salty. And I want that because that is more wine friendly as well, not be overly salty. This is gonna be a mild basil pesto where the basil comes through and the wine pairing really shines. All right, so I put those two in together. You saw where I nicked off the root end of the garlic clove. It's peeled, that's important. Make sure you peel the garlic clove. And then in goes the cheese. It's about 2 ounces. And we're gonna pulse it up together. Simple, simple. Maybe 20 seconds that we're doing this, and after that 20 seconds we end up with a texture kind of like, I don't know, kind of like breadcrumbs. It's really crumbly and nuggety and delicious, and it's going to ultimately end up being really, really smooth after we add the olive oil, which is the whole binding ingredient in basil pesto. And of course olive oil, just ask the Tuscans, just ask any European, is magic when it comes to wine matching. Now, going to add about 3 cups of freshly torn basil leaves. Now it answers the question, why do they sell basil at the farmer's market in armloads? Because you need an armload for basil pesto, but it's worth it because it's such a delicious recipe and there's so much you can do with it. We'll talk about that in a minute. So there's my basil, and then I'm going to add a pinch of salt. Not too much because, again, I don't want it to overpower the wine. I just need the salt to pop the flavors. And speaking of popping the flavors, the classic basil pesto recipe doesn't include lemon juice, but I add a little bit of fresh squeezed lemon juice because of 2 things. Number one, it helps pop the flavors, like I mentioned, but it also helps to fix and preserve the beautiful emerald green color. And basil, like a lot of greens, can oxidize after a while and start to look brown. Still tastes good, by the way. Don't knock it. Once your basil pesto starts to darken a little bit, still eat it. It's still good. All right, here we go. Now we're going to just pulse this up, and this is going to start to look like the grass clippings after you mow the lawn, but that's what you're looking for. All right, so let's go for some grass clippings now. They just smell a whole lot better, and that's saying a lot, because grass, freshly cut, smells good. Just ask any wine person. We love that descriptor on a good Sauvignon Blanc. All right, so now we've got that pulsed up, and so we're ready to add the olive oil, and it's going to be about 4 tablespoons in total, just enough to make it a creamy, almost emulsified paste. And now I'm going to start adding the olive oil as I mix in the blender. That's not a blender, that's a food processor. I've had this thing for as long as I've been cooking, and it's still as effective today as it was the day I got it, so that's a really good thing. All right, so we've added plenty of olive oil to give us a gorgeous, creamy, yummy paste. Actually, we haven't added enough. I'm going to add a little bit more. And let me go to my backup olive oil actually here. Here we go. Let me grab that. There we go. Okay. And a little bit more. Beautiful. All right. And now, this kitchen smells fantastic. Now, basil pesto, I told you it was a love letter to wine, and specifically it's a love letter to red wine. And anybody who knows their Italian cooking knows of course that it would go with Italian red wines, and the classic pairing would be, for example, a Chianti Classico or any Tuscan red. The Tuscan reds are based on Sangiovese typically, so Brunello, Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, Chianti Classico Reserva. It all sounds like the title of an opera, doesn't it? But those are the names of the wines of Tuscany, and those are delicious with basil pesto and my other favorite end of summer food and wine pairing, which adding to the basil is fresh tomatoes, right? We've got a bumper crop of heirloom, sweet, homegrown tomatoes. This is the time to bust them out with your basil, right? Perfect, perfect pairing. But I discovered living here in Napa Valley, where it's Cabernet country, that oh my gosh, it is an amazing match with Cabernet Sauvignon. So we've been loving this Staglin, which is a super duper splurge for sure. But if you just, all you sprung for was basil and tomatoes in the market, you got a little extra money to spring for a great Cabernet Sauvignon, so why not? And in Napa Valley, they're world famous, and so they can get a little pricey. That's why I'm showing you a couple of alternatives. I'm showing you a couple of wines that we're featuring on Delta. We've got featured on selected Delta flights the Jordan Cabernet Sauvignon from the Alexander Valley in Sonoma County. Delicious with this pairing. And then I've got a wine from Washington State, Chateau Ste. Michelle. This is the Colt Canoe Ridge Estate Cabernet Sauvignon. We're featuring that in wines as a wine by the glass in Delta Sky Clubs. So here's what I'm going to do with the basil pesto. Now, you could mix it in with mashed potatoes. You could spread it on a potato instead of butter, like a baked potato. You could mix it with pasta, of course, that's the classic thing, but I just spread it on a crostini, add a couple of the tomatoes, and I've got the magical mystery tour of wine matches. Because why in the world this is such a good match? It's hard for me to say. I think it's probably the delicious herbaceousness of the basil pesto going with the slight herbaceousness of Cabernet Sauvignon, the richness of the cheese and the olive oil that brings out all of the richness of the wine and softens up those tannins. So those are just a couple of ideas of why it works. All I know is that I love it, and you will too. So that's basil pesto, super easy. You don't need to be a great cook or have any culinary skills at all. You don't need to fire up the oven or the grill to have the ultimate end of summer food and wine pairing